What if I told you that Hamilton's Ferrari could be broken from the design? That the problem is not the pilot but the car? Today we are going to reveal the technical scandal that Frederic Vasseur uncovered in the 2025 Singapore GP. Prepare to discover what no one dared to count on the SF25. During the classification of the 2025 Singapore Grand Prix, while the cameras were focused on the performance of the pilots and the time of the stopwatch, in the Ferrari engineers' zone a moment of silent tension was brewing. Frederic Vasseur, head of the Scuderia, had requested a detailed crossing between real-time telemetry data and simulation maps of simulators, something that is not normally done in full Q2 unless something does not fit. And what he found was alarming. It was not a marginal mistake of tuning, nor a bad choice of tires or pressures. What Vasseur detected was a persistent compensation pattern by the pilot, Lewis Hamilton, who indicated that the car was working against his own pilot, not with him. Each curve entry, each late braking, each acceleration after a technical chicana such as those abounding in Marina Bay, revealed millimeter adjustments that had not been ordered by the team from boxes, nor were they on the strategy sheet. Hamilton was literally reprogramming his real-time driving style to keep SF25 on track, and that is not what an elite Formula One car should demand. Vasseur did not be alarmed by what he saw, but for what he did not see. There was no technical feedback of the car that informed Hamilton when the car would lose grip. There was no margin of error. The car reacted late or void to the pilot's inputs, leaving Hamilton without any reliable reference of dynamic behavior. And that is the type of behavior that, in the past, has caused accidents. But this time, the pilot was so synchronized with the problem that corrected it in advance, something that no simulator or wind tunnel would have predicted. The most surprising and also worrying is that Hamilton, with decades of experience, not only recognized these patterns during the classification, but had already begun to pilot the margin of the car. I was ignoring the suggestions of the traction control system, modifying established braking points, and managing inertia with the body, not with the configuration maps. In practical terms, it was driving a Formula One car as if it were an analog machine, an extension of its reflections rather than an instrument refined by digital engineering. And that is so much a demonstration of absolute talent, as an indirect accusation to the car they gave him. This was evidenced in the Night Bay night classification, where moisture conditions changed slightly after Q1. At first glance, the asphalt was dry and the ambient temperature remained relatively constant. But the sensors in the tires revealed something that the human eye could not see. A minimum variation of moisture in the air had closed, in an abrupt way, the optimal temperature window of the rear tires. That window in the SF25 is so narrow that a deviation of just 2 or 3 degrees Celsius can transform a stable car into an ungovernable one. That the rear axle began to overheat much earlier than expected, and that completely destabilized the balance of the car. As a result, Hamilton could no longer stop as late as he had done in Q1, nor could he apply aggressive power when leaving slow curves. Every millimeter of acceleration became a bet. Was there grip? Or the tires were melting internally? And the worst part is that the car did not provide clear signals. There were no warnings in the system, there were no sensors vibrating or sound warnings. Only the pilot intuition made the difference between staying on the track or losing half a second in a microsecond of tensile loss. This phenomenon, known as thermal crossover, is common in all cars. But in the case of SF25, the operational window is not only narrower than average, it is practically a line. Any deviation out of that range turns the car into an unpredictable car, even for someone with the reflexes and experience of Lewis Hamilton. Once Ferrari discovered the thermal fragility of the SF25, the next logical step was to review the other great pillar of Formula One, aerodynamics. And what was found was just as alarming. It was not simply lack of load or drag problems. What was detected in the SF25 is that its aerodynamic design has no room for maneuver. It is a car so specialized in certain contexts that is completely disarmed when it is taken from that ideal script. In practice, it is as if they were competing with a wind tunnel prototype, not with a racing car ready to face a global championship. During the Singapore classification, the aerodynamic fragility of the car was totally exposed. The slower sections of the layout, those in which maximum vertical load is needed to train without wasting time, became a trap for Ferrari. In those 90-degree curves, in which other cars such as McLaren or Mercedes could apply power with confidence, the SF25 showed nervous, unstable, almost fearful behavior. It was not a setup problem. It was a base problem. The most revealing thing is that the SF25 was designed under a linear efficiency logic. This means that its aerodynamic architecture is optimized to function in line with very little resistance, But that gain is achieved at the expense of sacrificing low-speed load. In theory, DRS and front wing settings should correct this disadvantage in circuits such as Marina Bay. But in practice, compensatory mechanisms do not have enough rank. When Ferrari tries to close the angle of attack to gain support in slow curves, the car becomes slow in line. And when it opens it to gain peak speed, it loses traction in curve outlet. There is no intermediate solution that is viable in real career conditions. This makes the SF25 a reactive car, not proactive. Instead of imposing its performance on the circuit, it responds to what the circuit allows you to do. He cannot attack pianos aggressively. It cannot tolerate abrupt changes of direction. And each steering wheel correction becomes a risk of aerodynamic destabilization. Lewis Hamilton noticed it from the first round thrown into classification. The car did not settle well at the lateral support points, and the lack of downforce in the rear forced to contravalize even in curves that, in theory, should be taken with full confidence. In addition, there is an aspect that has begun to worry the technical direction of Ferrari. The SF25 seems to have a highly dependent on dynamic rake, that is, the longitudinal inclination of the car in braking and acceleration. This type of philosophy, if not perfectly calibrated with suspensions, generates negative effects. Upon entering curve, if the front axle lowers too much and the rear does not respond with millimeter precision, the laminar flow is lost under the flat bottom. And without that flow, all the soil effect is lost. In Singapore, this happened repeatedly in the low-speed curves, where the loss of ground effect became a constant threat. Hamilton, given thermal instability, lack of aerodynamic support and the narrow operating window of its car, did not decompose. Instead of waiting instructions or adjustments from boxes as any average pilot would do, it took absolute control of your vehicle from intuition, modifying its curved driving style, back after return. There were no spoiler adjustments, there were no strategy tricks. What there was a pilot reading with surgical precision the limits of a car that seemed not to want to collaborate. And the most impressive is that this compensation process was given in real time, without prior test, without previous data of similar conditions on track, and without visual reference tools. Hamilton changed braking points without losing aggressiveness, altered its passage path by curves so as not to destabilize the rear axle, modified the torque delivery through the accelerator modulating on foot, not by electronics. Basically, he experienced what the car could not offer by design. During the post-clarifying review, Ferrari engineers compared Hamilton's paths with those of other pilots, including his partner Charles Leclerc. What they found was disturbing. Hamilton's corrections did not respond to any prior indication of the predictive analysis system. That is, it was driving beyond the limits that the software considered optimal. And yet it was faster. That not only challenges the internal logic of the team, destroys it. This type of gap between the design theory and reality on track reflects that Ferrari has built a car that does not know how to take care of himself. He needs someone to guide him as if he were an inexperienced car with a margin of zero error. And if that someone is Hamilton, everything seems to be under control. But if he cannot, or if that pressure consumes it with the passage of the calendar, Ferrari does not have a technical plan. It has a problem. It is important to understand what this means in terms of equipment management. Vasseur cannot use telemetry as a reference to evolve the car if the pilot is taking behavioral shortcuts to survive. You cannot refine an aerodynamic package if you do not understand what the real behavior of the pilot's intervention is. And cannot correct thermal weaknesses if the pilot is masking its effects with intuitive strategies. In summary, Hamilton is being more useful than any simulation software or any test bench. And that is as admirable as worrying. Because what we have seen in Singapore is not an isolated failure. It is a symptom of something deeper. The SF25 is not failing for bad luck. It is failing because it has been built with a philosophy that demands perfect conditions to work. And the real Formula One, as we all know, does not offer perfect conditions. It offers pressure, constant change, chaos, and only the equipment that can adapt survive. Do you think that Hamilton can maintain this superhuman level of adaptation during all these months? Are we facing a new rebirth, or before another year that must be minimized damage?